welcome to another episode of OpenIntro. I'm Joel Blake, and it's a pleasure to be with you once again. And I always love these types of interviews because you meet people who, their reputation absolutely precedes them, but when you meet them, you learn so much more. And today's guest is no different. So I want to introduce the wonderful Ben Brabyn. How are you doing, Ben?
I'm very well indeed, Joel. Thanks. It's a pleasure to join you.
No, thank you. I know we've crossed paths, in the past, and I remember your time at one of the organizations I'm sure you'll mention, but it came across again in our recent conversations around your journey and what you've been able to achieve. So really looking forward to really diving into some of that, and I'm sure our viewers will truly engage with some of those gems. Before we really get into the conversation, I just wonder if you can maybe just take a couple of minutes and just kind of tell people who you are.
Okay, well, thank you. As you say, I'm Ben Brabyn. I guess at a stage of my career where I've got lots and lots of different ingredients all coming together. I started my career as a Royal Marine. Then I was briefly an investment banker with JP Morgan. Then I built and sold a crowdfunding business in the early days of the internet. And then I worked briefly for the UK government, introducing overseas investors to UK tech companies. Then I spent 4 years running an organization called Level 39 based in Canary Wharf. And more recently, I've been working with a wide range of organizations, public and private sector, large and small, UK and international. And the work I've been doing with them, and most of my focus now, really is on helping organizations tap into what's going on outside their own organizational boundary. So making sure that no matter how large or small you are, you've got the ability to bring around you or find around you, if it's already there, an ecosystem of support. So making sure that even if you are small, especially, you have the benefit of all of the access you could wish for. And of course, that applies for gaining access to investors as well as to customers and expertise.
That's fantastic. You're absolutely right. I think the whole idea of the ecosystem and having that support around you is so crucial. And, definitely want to get into some of that in our conversation today. But I like to start like I do with all my guests, is really getting an understanding of, I guess, your why and the purpose behind what you do. So, I always ask, why do you do what you do?
Well, what I do gives me an opportunity to spend a lot of time with people, whether that's going for walks, which I do regularly, rather than have very many office meetings. I tend to go out for walks with people. And that gives them the opportunity both to get some fresh air, but also to get fresh perspectives. People think and behave in different ways when you go out of the usual office spaces, out of the usual meeting places. And what I found is that helping people to find their spare capacity really is incredibly valuable for them and candidly for me as well. So I spend my time exploring with people what becomes possible when they allow themselves the time and space, not, if you like, to be chasing the next immediate transaction, but to create relationships which are full of potential, even where that potential is not totally obvious. Because I've realized that through doing that, people do actually transact faster. They do build more opportunity. And that, I guess, is my central insight, that often the indirect path, in collaboration with other people, is much more effective than the direct path of transaction and, rapid pitch and engage and move on to the next one. So that's why I do it. I help people to realize the value of their relationships.
I really agree on that because, that sense of diversity of thought, diversity of perspective, diversity of conversation always unlocks new opportunities that is often hidden. People talk about, the transactional world of business being very black and white, but a lot of things happen in the gray area, and it's that connection and collaboration that enable those things to happen. But why for you was that always so important in your own journey, I guess, in the early days of your career? Because it strikes me that, you've gone on a very eclectic journey yourself, but it seems like there's always been that central track. So why was that always so important to you?
Well, the central thread from way back is understanding of and interest in networks. So I built a very early crowdfunding business and really helped to shape the development of that industry. But I was much more interested not in the way money moved around the internet, but the behaviors and incentives of the people involved in persuading and then responding to that persuasion. And so it is that insight into the behavior of people, if you like, at arm's length, further out in the network than just the people I'm immediately talking to. That has always fascinated me. And it's that very much that I've spent my career seeking to understand more and to become better at responding to, developing.
It seems like that sense of human psychology then has been an area of interest almost, would you say, in terms of how different people think and how they translate that into the way in which they connect with others? Has that been something of interest?
It has. And I think there is an aspect of that which really stands out for me, which is that, of course, we spend our lives dealing with our problems. We might like to talk about opportunity, but essentially the constraint, the thing that everyone's doing every day is solving the next problem in their list. And, some people find parts of that easy and other parts hard. But what I've observed is that it's almost always the case that whatever problem you might be wrestling with today, there's someone else nearby who's probably solved that to the extent that they don't even think of it as a problem. They'll be wrestling, meanwhile, with their own problem. If you're lucky, you'll have the solution to their problem and they'll have the solution to yours. But even if it's not that neat, if you spend a bit of time with them, you may solve their problem. They may not solve yours, but they may introduce somebody who does. And the willingness to risk that seems to me relatively rare, but also incredibly well rewarded. And if you can be systematic, deliberate about it, and that's what we help our clients to do, then you rapidly find that you benefit from the sort of offcuts of other people's work, the things that they didn't think were valuable because they didn't realize how hard you might be finding that. This is a huge opportunity for all of us. It's about moving knowledge around to where it's most valuable and most timely.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, I remember in my early days, and even when I was starting my own career, I had an idea about something, didn't know where to start. There was that sense of fear of people saying your idea is rubbish, or you're not solving a problem, you're just going to create a very expensive hobby for yourself. And I remember talking to one individual who sadly passed on, but she was giving me advice and guidance, but it wasn't so much, you need to do this, it's more, well, this is my experience. And it was learning the gems from that experience that helped me to look at it, how it works in my own. And then that gives you greater confidence to see what you can do. But it's people being willing to be vulnerable and to be open. And how have you found, I guess, that sense of being open has, certainly in your own career, how have you found that? How have you found people being willing to be open? Or has it always been, it's a very transactional way of doing things and then they become open? Have you always found people to be quite receptive and open to learning?
Well, this is one of the great sort of filters among us. Some people find this very difficult, others find it easier. And I think some people find it easy in some aspects of their lives and harder in others. So my response to that is to say, well, first of all, engage where this is easiest. Now, when, for example, we gather groups of people from a variety of different backgrounds, we usually challenge them with a topic where none of them are going to be experts. That has a huge advantage, which is that when no one feels they are expected to be an expert in something, it's much easier for them to risk being wrong. And it's when they risk being wrong that they're more likely to find ways of being right, or if not being right, then at least being usefully heading in a useful direction. And so this is another counterintuitive approach we routinely use. It is to find areas where the stakes are low for people, rather than always going straight to the hard thing. Now, if there is a hard topic that you need to wrestle with, taking an indirect approach can often be far more effective. So build the trust and build the confidence and what sometimes people call psychological safety with low stakes conversations. And then when the stakes must be high, you'll know you're dealing with people you can rely on and trust and feel comfortable recognizing where you may be stuck.
So let's talk a little bit about your actual professional career, because, as I say, you've been on a bit of an eclectic journey, it seems. But I think you mentioned that you started out in the Marines. How was that experience, and how or do you think that experience started to shape or has shaped your business journey?
Well, starting your career in the Royal Marines is a fantastic opportunity for anyone. And it's an organization that I really heartily recommend and I'm very proud to have been a part of. And of course, you never really get to leave. So friendships endure from those harsh foundations. And I still regard myself as very much part of the family. But in terms of how it shaped my professional career since, you very early on learn how to deal with very large amounts of uncertainty and to be adaptive. And perhaps that's a useful tool when you're learning how to deal with being wrong later in your career. So, if you invest in or hire a veteran, someone who's served in the military, you can expect them to be adaptable. You can expect them to be good at communication, and you can expect them to be good at analyzing a problem and forming a plan to try to respond to it. So it's a really good foundational experience for everybody. And I'd heartily recommend you to invest in and hire and engage with and buy from veterans. You'll find that they are a very impressive set of people with whom to work. So I think it's a great start. And I'm also, of course, grateful to the people who stay in and continue in that profession and help us all stay safe.
Tell us about, I guess, that transition that you went from the military into your first business. What was that like for you, going from one environment to another?
A few years later, I was asked to make a presentation at the British Library for people who were heading out of the military and into civilian life and roles, which gave me a really good opportunity to reflect on exactly that question. And I identified then the various different tools that you needed to have assembled into your toolkit for life. And I thought the military provided two really good tools. One was adaptability, as you've highlighted, and the other one, which you've also highlighted, is determination. And I characterize those by a hammer on the one hand and duct tape or masking tape on the other if it needs to be held together.
Absolutely.
One of the things about which I knew nothing was financial management. Another thing was marketing and sales. I knew how to communicate a plan, but I didn't necessarily know how to sell a product or service. So those were both gaping holes in my experience. And so I was very fortunate. I was recruited by JP Morgan and sent off to Wall Street and took part in the analyst training program, which was like learning financial analysis and modeling and how to use Excel in particular to build financial models. It was intellectually really exciting. I loved that. I left JP Morgan to set up a financial technology business, a crowdfunding platform. And I think the thing which it became clear I was still missing most of all, and I was very fortunate, I then, while setting up that business, also went to business school at Warwick Business School to try and fill in some of these gaps. Learned a lot about marketing in particular from brilliant teachers there. But the thing that I needed most then, and which I continue to need most, and which I think I can do the most to help others with, is networks. Now, this has in a way got a bad reputation. Sometimes people talk about it as a sort of transactional activity of going and collecting business cards and going to endless events and drinks and so on. But I do believe that the greatest opportunity is that the answer to almost all of my problems is easily available to somebody else. Okay. I've just got to get a bit smarter about how to engage with them. And I can do that really fast, really cost effectively, and at massive scale. And I can help others to do so too. So that is what I do now.
That's quite interesting. At that time when you identify that convergence between the skills gaps and the ability to engage networks. And I guess the education side gave a bit of a framework of how to do that to a degree. But that notion of networks and the uncertainty, but the opportunity that is found within networks, I really find that fascinating. And I'd like to kind of dive into that just a little bit, because I reflect again on just some of the things I've kind of experienced in my own journey, where without networks, I don't know where things would have gone, but I wouldn't have known that without the networks in the first place, if that makes sense. I wouldn't have known what outcomes I was going to achieve, but I wouldn't even know what networks were needed to be in order to achieve them. And it's through luck and circumstance that you find individuals or you find situations where you get a bit of learning that opens up a new door, which then takes you down another universe, so to speak. When it comes to networks, how do you really build an effective network as a business leader? And that's not necessarily in terms of networks from a personal point of view, because there are different types of networks that you would need as a business leader. But what are the foundational elements, if you like, of building a great effective network as a business leader?
Well, I think the first thing to note is, why build when you can borrow? If you possibly can, my suggestion is join existing networks. Don't feel that you have to reinvent every wheel. There's a famous story about someone being asked why they robbed banks, and their answer was because that's where the money is. And I would say the same about networks. Go to where the networks are already rich, deep, and varied, and join in. And you'll find that most of the work is already done. You'll be massively helped if you've got a clear idea about what your objectives are. And also, if you've got a really simple, clear message. And here's another surprise for many people. That message doesn't need to be your pitch. In fact, it's almost certainly not going to be your pitch, because your pitch, even if it's just an elevator pitch, is far too long for most of us to remember on a Monday morning after we heard it on a Saturday evening. You should leave us with just enough of a soundbite that we remember you enough that in a few months' time, when we mention you to someone else and that person is in a position to become your next customer, not that they know everything about you, but that they know enough to want to find out more, and they come to you.
So what would be an example of that soundbite?
Well, okay, so the trouble is it's not going to be the same for everybody.
Of course, yeah.
It's notable almost always because it's embarrassing to you how reduced it is. So, for example, I have spent a lot of time studying networks, and with those people who are inclined to go into the science of it, I'm very happy talking about different types of centrality and so forth. I find that really interesting. But I don't think very many people are going to want to think of me as the network. During the pandemic, I built rockets with my son. He suggested it. I said I agreed to it because I thought that practically speaking, it wouldn't be possible. It was an easy win as a parent. To my surprise, he'd already found the YouTube videos with the explainers. And so we started building rockets. And loads of people started getting interested in this. And in the 4 years since then, people still have come to me as going, you're the rocket guy. Now, of course, I don't sell rockets, but it has opened up real business opportunities for me because I'm memorable, not necessarily because my expertise is clear. Perhaps my willingness to take experiments is something which comes across. But the key point is none of my expertise is really conveyed by that, but my reputation is. And this really illustrates research done by a man called Harvey Coleman, who points out that the outcomes that we experience as individuals and as organizations are much more to do with the exposure that we have than they are to detailed knowledge of our capability. And it is therefore far more efficient to exercise your resources in building that exposure with a very, very simple message than in trying to convey all of the complexity and brilliance of the thing that you spend your time.
I really resonate with that. I think it was Daniel Priestley, you talked about owning your own entrepreneurial island, I believe, or maybe paraphrasing, but the idea of owning your own niche and it being a niche that you're recognized for, not necessarily something that you're constantly, well, you would promote and sell your area of expertise. But if people recognize you for that and it's recognition at a level that enables you to create that moat around yourself, then you own that kind of proverbial island. And that sense of being memorable, maybe in that context of being the rocket guy, is because they recognize you for owning that kind of space. And I think for many entrepreneurs in particular, you set up this vehicle that you call a business to provide a solution to solve a problem. But quite often the difference of how you're going to solve that problem can become lost because you're so focused on the outcome of what you're trying to achieve versus being known for delivering a unique outcome to achieve and solve that problem. And so I think, what you're saying there, if I'm correct, is that value proposition is what people will identify you with, which may not always be what you think it is. And how have you found that kind of juxtaposition, I guess, in your career?
Notice that it's much easier to do it for other people than it is for yourself, because as you rightly say, it might not be the way you think of yourself. And, I would like to think of myself as somebody who's, knows quite a lot about certain things, my little sort of pockets of deep expertise. But if, recently someone introduced me to someone as, this is Ben, he knows 1 million people. Now, my immediate reflex was to think, no, that's not the thing that matters about me. No, I do know a lot of people, but here, I'd love to tell you about what I know that I think matters. But I thought, well, no, I'll take that. That's a very easy way for someone else to remember me. And it conveys enough information that might make that person want to follow up with something which is relevant. It's probably, of course, more relevant than this is Ben, he's the rocket guy. Candidly, I'll take either. And I'd encourage other people to do so too. So, for example, if you're working in healthcare, then rather than conveying all of the detail of the particular technology or capability you're working on, it's often sense to say, well, what's this a small part of that really matters to lots of people? Am I, for example, stopping people bleeding to death? Because that's immediately attention catching. So, for example, one of the things we do at the moment is exactly that. We find people who can contribute from whatever discipline they come to the search for ways of reducing the number of people who bleed to death. It's very easy to call people to that cause because everyone can visualize it and relate to it. And many people begin to realize they may even have a part to play, even though it's clearly not in their job description. And it's a call to arms which appeals very widely. We reckon that everyone benefits from having a call to arms that appeals very widely.
I really like that. As you were just talking there, I'm visually kind of mapping out almost what you're saying in pictures. And I think the idea of having, if you think of a tree, you've got your proverbial trunk of the tree, and that might be your deep expertise. But then as the tree grows, it through networks, it has multiple branches that can take it into many, many different directions. But people might recognize you for a branch, but it always leads back to your own level of expertise. But as you say, I'm Ben, or someone notifies you as Ben, he knows 1 million people, that could be one branch. But once someone talks to you based on that branch, then they learn more about your deep expertise. And you will be able to work out whether that expertise can add value to them on that branch that they recognize you for or not. Or indeed, if someone sees multiple things that you do, it gives you the opportunity to utilize those networks to really double down on what you do best, because you can see where it can add value in those different spaces. Again, I think sometimes entrepreneurs, we focus so much on being one of those branches, it becomes easy to lose that kind of trunk of expertise. And depending on how far you go, you lose that position in the market, or you lose that sense of advantage because you're trying to do something that other people know you for, when really what you did best is what you already did. And I think we've all been victim to that at some shape or form. Tell me a little bit more about, I guess, then kind of your current activity and your current ventures. And I know you mentioned healthcare and other elements, but tell us a little bit more.
Sure. Well, if I may, I'm just going to pick up a point you made there, which I think is brilliant. The fact is, very often we're wrong. We ourselves are wrong about the best application of our capability. And a great way to avoid missing out on opportunity is to use these broader invitations and descriptions. So, for example, if you think what you're really good at is one thing, but its greatest value is in a different sector or industry or geography, it's a really good idea if you leave that possibility open, invite people to engage with you on the broader assumption rather than the narrower assumption. In other words, keep an open mind and be ready to be wrong about what you think about yourself. And that leads on to, I guess, the answer to your question now. What I do now. So I find that there are a great many organizations that could be growing faster, could be engaging customers more easily at a greater frequency, and that could be engaging with investors and sometimes, where appropriate, regulators and policymakers more effectively, as well as drawing in capabilities that they currently don't have but need. So the world to me looks like it is full of opportunities that are on the brink of being realized by organizations that don't realize them, don't realize how close they are. And it's helping those organizations to achieve those advances. That's what we do. That's what my company AmityPath does. And the way we do it, it really has three threads. One thread is finding that really simple call to arms, that very clear, broad message. Not so much what are we doing, but what are we a part of that matters to as many people as possible? What is it that can be said about us which draws the attention of anyone who might be valuable to us? A way to think of this, if you like, is your minimum valuable message. What's the least that could be said about you that would be helpful? So in my case, for example, Ben knows 1 million people. Well, that fits the bill pretty well. It's, of course, not actually true. I don't know 1 million people. But it's a very useful summary of the kind of function that I might bring, the benefit that I might bring to anybody else, is that I certainly specialize in getting access to what's in the hearts and minds of others. So the first is a very simple approach to message. The second is a clear understanding of network function. And this is where it gets a bit more scientific, looking at the degrees of centrality and betweenness centrality that people and organizations have, for example, and helping them to be deliberate about making sure that they are engaging with, let's say, adjacent disciplines to secure the expertise or the market access that they need but don't have. So how can you make those small steps, rather than speculating wildly, how can you make small steps through relationships to find out if there is opportunity on your doorstep, but in a slightly different direction from where you first thought? And the third step is we figure out how to engage more and more people in that search. What, if you like, are the motivations of people who are never going to be your customers and never going to be your investors, but who may still help you because they might introduce someone, in turn introduces someone who is. In other words, how can we make your environment go from being one in which the boundaries of your organization, to borrow your sort of visual description, rather than being like an onion where you grow by adding one layer at a time just on the edges of where you're at? How can we, again, to borrow your analogy of the tree or the forest, how can we make sure that we're putting out roots, exploring far and wide at low cost and at low risk and at great speed?
Get it. I love that minimal viable message piece, because arguably the theoretical view is that you should be talking to as many people as possible with with the highest volume of messaging as possible in all these different ways, and kind of a volume approach. But if I'm hearing correctly, what you're saying is, what's the smallest amount of value that you can be known for that can have the biggest amount of reach, and therefore that capacity between the small but powerful message that you're known for, how do you scale that gap and therefore give you the most opportunity and capacity to get the most amount of value? Whereas arguably we are taught that you have to have you know, you have to deal with the capacity first, and then you can get the reward. What you're saying is, what's the biggest wedge into that capacity gap or value gap that's just waiting for you to tap into? Your wedge gives you a gap to know 1 million people, and that's the value. Is that the old story as well of the shipbuilder? You know, there's a problem with the ship, and it charges the earth just to do one tap with a hammer, and that's what you're paying for. It's knowing where to tap, right? And I guess in a similar way, that value gap there is so interesting. But I would say within that gap, though, there is so much uncertainty and so much vulnerability, so many questions, so much opportunity of learning and understanding. How do you encourage leaders to enter into that gap and go all in? You know, once they're known for that wedge, how do you help them to feel confident to engage into that space when what they're really looking for is the certainty to know which route they should be going?
It's a fantastic question. And of course, most of us spend most of our time trying to make a plan and then follow the plan. And so it's hard to persuade people that perhaps that approach, this sort of approach of trying to meet the people who are prospect customers or investors or colleagues, and then pitching them, that that's the best way. And yet experience time and again shows that there are better ways. And so my main learning, for example, running Level 39 for 4 years, surrounded by about 250 companies, some of them fantastically successful. Revolut came there as a team of 3, for example, some of them much less successful. So this is not all a biased sample of those that are successful. This is a real opportunity to see a really wide distribution of behaviors and outcomes. But a rule of thumb, which I noticed, is that the best predictive indicator of success is not how much a company is out there talking about itself. It's how much it's being talked about by others. Now, this is uncomfortable because you don't know necessarily when you're being talked about by others. And your point about uncertainty really stands here. You don't know if it's working. You don't know what they're saying. You don't know whether what they're saying is true or false. The truth is, the win here is that you're being spoken about at all. So most people spend most of their time trying to solve the problem of forming a correct impression, conveying detailed, complete, correct information. When in fact, no matter how big your organization is, almost all of the world's smart people are on the outside of it. And most of those people are very busy talking about other things. So the big win is getting any of them talking about you and what you're doing. It matters much less whether they've got a complete set of information. So to take a contrasting case, for example, I would far rather that 100 people are describing me, technically incorrectly, as the guy who knows 1 million people, because the chances are that people who hear that will be interested enough in me, if it's relevant to them and a problem they have, to come to find me to validate and verify the information. And when they discover I don't know 1 million people, they may be disappointed. Or alternatively, they may go, well, okay, why is it that people think you do? Because that's what's relevant to me. So let's zero in on the detail. Is there an opportunity for us to collaborate? And so here's a rule which is easier for most people to see. Do you think you are yourself more likely to buy from someone else if they tell you how great they are, or if you hear about them from somebody else? And time and again, most people prefer that more plausible, independent reference than just a really hot pitch. And yet, so many entrepreneurs think what I've got to do is pitch, pitch, pitch. That's not the best way. We set out to create conditions where organizations are at the heart of conversations. But of course, the best thing about this is that once you've done it, you can get on with the day job. Other people are doing the work for you. And if you approach your ecosystem in the right way, they will do so willingly and relentlessly. They'll keep you in the minds of others until those others are ready to come and buy from you. And especially in a B2B environment where sales cycles can be slow, your chances of delivering the brilliant pitch on the day where the budget holder is ready and willing and able to buy from you is very low. So you need to find a way of making sure that just enough of your message sticks in the back of their mind. The best way is for the messages short and the reminders are frequent, and they come from trusted third parties. Those are the conditions we create.
Short, frequent third party. That's so fascinating. I never really considered it in that way, because you'd think what you just described there is effectively marketing. But if I'm hearing correctly, it's not marketing in the way that it is readily accepted. It's that value prop. It's a lot of small, repeated, consistent messaging around your value prop at scale versus one big wallop, if you like, of pitching of this is me, hey, this is what we do. It's other people constantly being reminded about what you do, but at a volume where you then find the percentage that are more interested to take it forward, whilst the others over time are still getting the same messaging. So when their time is right, they become part of that funnel that comes to you. That's really, really interesting.
I think we our company is called Amity Path, and perhaps that was a mistake because some people immediately think of horrors and horror films.
Yeah.
We really mean friendship. Of course, this is an organized way of thinking about friendship. How do you make sure that your organization and you yourself have friends who wish you well and who, on the margins, are always just saying just enough about you to increase the probability of your success? And we never offer a guarantee, but we do improve your chances. This is all about probabilities, really. How can we make sure you have the best chance, whether you're entering a new market, launching a new product, or looking for a new capability? It makes a huge amount of sense to find a way of enlisting lots of friends outside your own organization with whom you have overlapping interests, and they will benefit from it and you will benefit from it.
So do you work more with kind of small businesses, startups or corporates or whomever? Who's your ideal target market for what you do? Because it strikes me that methodology works in all these different spaces.
You're right. Of course, that's a challenge, isn't it? It's like the solution to every problem. It's very tempting to say, well, what do you want? We can do it all. And the answer to your question is we do work with a very wide range of organizations. We work with public and private sector organizations. We work with academic organizations. And we work, of course, with lots of entrepreneurs. But I think the common characteristic is not size or location or sector. It's a state of mind. It is a willingness to adopt an approach which really has this uncertainty built into it, in that we don't show a mechanistic, we don't plot out a network graph and say, this person will introduce this person who introduces this person who will turn you into a unicorn. We would not be true to ourselves if we were to suggest that. But what we do is we work with organizations that understand that in accepting that degree of uncertainty, you gain access to this profound change. And it is a cultural change, really, where you are offering yourself out into the community beyond the resources that you immediately control, knowing that if you do so in the right way, the ROI is massive. Even if you can't see exactly what's going on out there, you can create conditions which mean the probability is very high that you will be well rewarded with new customers, if you need them, with investors, and certainly with access to the kind of talent and expertise that you need. Yeah. And I suppose a good way of thinking about this is to say, you don't look for an ROI to friendship. I mean, you receive a huge amount from your friends in all sorts of ways, but you rarely look to sort of quantify that. Now, of course, when you work with us, you need to decide whether it's value for money. But what we are doing is we are effectively helping organizations to make friends and to do so at massive scale.
There's your MVM.
So if I could go from being the guy who knows a million people to the guy who has a million friends, then that's success.
That's absolute success. I love that. Well, look, as we kind of beginning to come to, I guess, the end of our time today, and I could talk about this all day. It just makes so much interest and use. But you know, with all your experiences of where you started to where you are to where you're going to be with your future endeavors, would you like to share just a leadership insight, something that maybe you've learned or experienced for yourself that you can maybe just share with others? Because it just strikes me that there's so much things you've learned along the way. It'd just be really great to hear, I guess, a leadership insight from you.
Yes, certainly. So I think I spent most of my career planning and executing plans, and that's worked reasonably well for me. I mean, I say it's worked reasonably well. I've been wrong most of the time, but I have been right a few times as well, and that's worked out. What I've realized more recently is that I can benefit not only, if you like, with specific insights, specific capabilities, opportunities to engage with specific prospect clients, for example, but I can go further than that. I can actually improve my decision-making and strategy by engaging and activating with my friendship network. And I mean friendship in this commercial, engaged sense. So I have found over the last few years, increasingly, while I might have a sense of the right direction, I get my really sharpened insights by engaging with that expert network of advisors that increasingly make themselves available to me. And that has been a somewhat nervous journey because it's uncertain. It involves trusting other people when you don't know very much necessarily about them or their motives. Of course, if you know everything about someone, you don't need trust because everything is entirely deterministic and predictable. But as a leader, learning to trust people in your network, whether that's your board or your advisors or your customers, is, I think, the most important lesson. I say it's the most important for me because it's perhaps the one I've learned most recently. And it's always that sort of, the problem that we are most obsessed with is the one we're wrestling with now. The lesson we're most struck by is the one we've just learned. And for me, it is learning to trust my network. I have been richly and profoundly rewarded, both commercially and personally, by doing so. And it's that I want to bring to as many other people as I can.
Well, you just answered what was going to be my last and final question, really, is, why should people come and spend some time with you? But, is there any other aspects of your work or your experience that you'd like to share as a benefit to those who do engage with you?
Well, I think that for those organizations particularly that are involved in some of the really wicked problems of our era, whether that's in healthcare or defense and security or resilience, these are not easy industries to be in. And these are the ones we, I think, are best equipped to help in. If you are adopting a new technology, if you are entering a new market, if you are seeking to engage with big, complex clients like the public sector or like big, regulated financial services or other types of business. These are the sorts of organizations where we can make the biggest difference. And so my invitation very much is to people who are prepared to accept that you don't need to convey everything about you to convey what matters. And people who are prepared to accept that if you trust your network, it rewards you richly, even if you can't see all of the ways in which it's done. And that maybe just working the phones and pitching everybody continuously is not your best approach. Then we'd love to talk to you. And we think we can make a real difference by bringing around you the warm embrace of a network which will transform your growth, will transform your appeal to customers and to investors, and also, very importantly, of course, to employees.
Fantastic. Well, Ben, I want to thank you for your time today, because I know you're extremely busy. And so just sharing today has been amazing. There's been so many gems and so many levels of insight and little tidbits that you said just in natural conversation today, which I'm sure our audience will really pick up on. Certainly for me, that sense of the MVM, multiple, minimal viable messages is really resonating. The idea of trusting the network, not just trying to build one or curate one, but actually trusting it once you've built it. That's really resonated because, building the network is one thing, being known within a network and networks is another, but being able to trust that is absolutely fundamental. And so I think that is important. And I think one of the things you started with is that sense of leadership and adaptability. I think in this day and time and the volatility of the world that we're in is more important than ever before to have that sense of adaptability. And that means being open. It means being vulnerable, but it also means having trust both in terms of what you offer, not trying to control too much how you deliver on what you offer, but give freedom and capacity for your network to bring that out and to help you to be able to deliver on that. But never losing that sense of purpose as well. I think that's really important. And I like that sense of, and the simplicity of making friends around your business. That's what this is about. Business is a people first thing. It's not about what you create or deliver per se, although those are very, very important, obviously. But it's about people. And if you're making the right friends in terms of your employees, your customers, your board, suppliers, holders, etc., in its truest sense, then that trust will be inherent. Growth will come through those relationships, and everyone benefits and everyone wins. So I really thank you for what you shared today. And as I say, I hope our audience will tap into that too.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for having me.
Thank you very much indeed. And so to all our viewers, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to watch this podcast interview. Get in touch with Ben. Please look for his profile on OpenIntro.com and book some time, and I'm sure you won't be disappointed. So Ben, thank you once again for your time.